Hey folks, JJ here in the spray booth of Jewett Guitars in lovely downtown Cleveland, Ohio. And for all of you new users to using Ilva 2-component urethane, you might have found that StewMac is selling it. It's also been my favorite finish now on guitars for well over, I want to say 8 or 9 years. Sorry about my hair. Anyways, I want to document in a little bit more detail the steps we do to do a very traditional 2-component urethane finish, and we're going to be doing it on an open grain wood. In this case, it's going to be mahogany with a spruce top. I've just finished part one, which is applying the epoxy, or the first application of the epoxy pore filler. So let me show you where we're at. About 3 hours ago, I finished applying one coat of Silvertip Epoxy to this mahogany and spruce guitar. In preparation for doing that, I did spray a very light coat of de-wax blonde shellac on the top to protect it, because I don't want to get any epoxy on that spruce top. So basically where I am right now is the epoxy has dried for about, I want to say 3 or 4 hours, and I also did the neck. Let me show you how I did this and how I got to this point. Silvertip Epoxy is sold as a 2-component epoxy. It is not an adhesive. It's more like a fiberglass resin that is used with like that fiberglass cloth that's used in certain industrial applications. Anyways, it makes a great pore filler for a couple of reasons. One is it's clear, and second of all, it doesn't have what's called an amine blush, which is a problem with other epoxies. Amine blush is when the hardener, if it's mixed a little bit out of proportion, floats to the top of the surface after it's dried. And if you don't remove that correctly, it can cause problems with the finish. But this doesn't have it. Notice one thing I did, it's just a tip. I put a piece of StewMac orange tape around the hardener because you don't want to get these caps mixed up. You get those caps mixed up, it's going to be halfway to a really bad day in getting it off the next time you use it. Anyways, this is mixed in a 2-to-1 ratio, and it's usually done by volume. I used to do it with a small cup. I just find now, though, it's much easier to mix exactly the amount that I need by weight. And I do it with one of these just kitchen scales. And what I do is I just weigh out 10 to 12 grams of the resin and 4 to 6 grams of the hardener. And I find that gives me plenty of epoxy with none left over to do an entire guitar, back and sides, and the neck on a typical OM. I even had a little bit left over, so you should be able to accommodate a dread. After I mix it up, or I weigh the ingredients, I mix it really thoroughly with well, in this case, just a wooden stir stick. And I mix it for about an hour. It will get air bubbles, but that's not a problem. Then what I do, okay, after it's mixed, is I have a bunch of these, which are disposable brushes. I take a brush with the epoxy, and the first thing I do is I brush the epoxy onto the sides. And I'm very careful not to get it on the spruce top. If I do get it on the spruce top, I do have that fudge factor with the shellac, and then I can wipe it off really quickly. You don't want to let the epoxy sit on that spruce top, though, for very long, because it will stain it. It'll make it a dark color, and it's very difficult to get rid of. So I'll brush the sides, and then what I do, and excuse me for going back and forth here, but I didn't get everything out that I wanted to. Take a credit card and squeegee off the excess on the sides, and then whatever comes off, just put it on the back here. So I'll go around completely to the sides, and then I'll just squeegee the excess onto the top or onto the back. Then I'll take a credit card and get all the excess off the back. And you can see I didn't do a perfect job, but that's okay because this is all going to get sanded off. I then will take my finger with any excess and I'll just kind of go around the binding to get some of that binding filled with the epoxy. In this case, I have an arm bevel with epoxy. So I just took my gloved finger and just kind of smushed the epoxy in there. That's a highly technical term for applying it correctly. So as you can see, I've got epoxy on the back and sides, and I did the same thing to the neck, except I don't use a credit card on the neck. I just take a paper towel and just wipe the excess off as best as I can. I then will let this dry for an overnight, and it should be ready to sand tomorrow morning when I come in. And I'll show you what we do tomorrow when I get into the shop in sanding this epoxy off. We'll then determine whether or not we want to apply a second coat of epoxy if the grain doesn't appear filled, but we'll make that decision tomorrow. So for now, over and out.